Okay, so we ran into this last hour where we had things like -7 squared. And I put it in parentheses because one, it helps me keep that -7 separated. Two, it makes sure the calculator knows what we're talking about. As we saw, if I put that in the calculator as just -7 squared, it's going to try to tell me it's -49. We know that's not true because -7 squared is -7 times -7. And we all know that a negative times a negative has to be a positive 49. So on the calculator, we have to put that in parentheses to make it work correctly. So -3 to the power of 3, -3 times -3 times -3. Will that result have to be positive or negative? Negative. Because as we've seen, we can only multiply two numbers at a time. So as we go through and we do the first two, negative times a negative has to be a positive. 3 times 3 is 9. Then that's multiplied by another negative, and a positive times a negative has to be negative. That'll be -27. And if we enter it in parentheses in our calculator, it will correctly give us the -27. How about something like -5 to the 4th power? Will that be positive or negative? Positive. That is 4 -5's multiplied together. And again, we can only do two at a time. So -5 times -5 is positive 25. Times another -5. It's 125, but it's a positive times a negative will be a negative. And now we have a negative times a negative, which means positive 125 times 5, 625. As we saw a week or so ago when we did negatives with powers, if there's an even power, those negatives all multiply out to get a positive answer. If it is an odd power, there's one negative left over at the end to make our answer negative. So -2 to the power 9, positive or negative? Negative. Good. It is actually a -512. -3 to the power of 8. It's going to be positive. Anybody want to guess what it is? Anybody know what it is? $64.81, if I remember right. Oh. $65.61. There we go. Now, if you recall from that, the way we defined our roots. The square root of a number. I'm just going to put the square root of x. That is asking us what number squared equals x. Because of this definition, it puts limits on what x can be. Can x be 0? Can I do the square root of 0? Is there a number such that if I square it, I get 0? Well, the logical guess would be 0, right? What's 0 squared? 0 times 0, which is 0. That works. The square root of 0 is 0. We can do that. can I do square root of 0.04? That's just 0.2. Okay. 0.2 squared is 0.04. So that works. So what can't I put in for x? Square root of 1. What's 1 squared? 1. How about the square root of negative 4? No, there is nothing, no number that if I square it will give me a negative 4, because anything squared is positive. If I put in a positive number, a positive times a positive has to be positive. If I put in a negative number, a negative times a negative has to be positive. Now, for the purposes of this class, we're going to leave it at that. The square root of a negative is what we call undefined. Or your calculator is going to say error. You can't square root a negative. For any of the classes you would take here at WITC, the square root of a negative is fine to be undefined. There's no need to square root a negative. If you get into electronics, solving electrical circuits and stuff like that, there are applications where you have formulas where you have to square root a negative. If you're going to go on to a 4-year degree of some sort, you're going to take a college algebra class. And I'm telling you this just for the sake of making sure I'm not lying to you. They will tell you how to square root a negative. Now, you don't need to put this in your notes because I'm never going to test you on it. What they do is they define the square root of negative 1 to be I. Where did they come up with I? Well, somewhere's two math geeks were sitting around saying, imagine if the square root of negative 1 were defined. And so since they were imagining it, they called it I, the imaginary number. And then they've developed a whole field of mathematics called the theory of complex numbers, which involves these imaginary numbers mixed with our real numbers, which are the ones that are not imaginary. We're not going to get into it. All you need to know is that the square root of 1, negative 1, is defined to be I. I won't ever test you on that or anything beyond it. But if you went on to a 4-year degree and took a college algebra course, you would spend a couple weeks most likely dealing with I. And like I said, there are applications where it is useful. If you get into electronics, capacitor inductor circuits where you have to solve your phases and stuff like that, it can be square roots of negative numbers and stuff like that. None of our electronics anymore even gets into phasors. I used to teach some of the electronics for telecom, and I used to teach the electronics for the auto collision, the auto body students before we dropped that program. And of course, none of the auto body stuff got into any complex. That was all DC electrical. But we used to talk about phasors with our telecommunications, but the equipment now has gotten more complex where you don't have to understand the complex algebra behind it anymore. Anyway, what's this symbol mean again? Cubed root. So what that means is whatever number I put inside here, it's asking what number to the third power, or cubed, equals that. Well, what number to the third power is 27? 3. That's 3. Because 3 cubed equals 27. How about the third root of 125? 5. Good. Now, if you don't know how to enter that on your calculator, it depends on your calculator. Some of you have an N root or an X root key like this. Generally, if it's a TI calculator, it is a second function that is above your power key. So if you've got the caret key for the power up above it, there's generally the N root key. what you would do is you would type in the 3, then you'd have to hit second, and then you'd press whichever key has that on it. Then you'd type in the 125 and hit equals. It'll spit out the 5. The graphing calculator, yours actually should be just like mine. You would type in the 3, and hit the math key. Then the X root. Now this actually does have a third root built into it, but I'm going to avoid that because all your roots above a square root will work the same with the X root. So I select the X root, put in the 125, and it tells me 5. So the third root of 125 is 5. Can I do the third root of a negative 125? Careful. If I do negative 5 to the third power, is that a positive 125 or a negative 125? Negative 125. Because it's an odd power, it's going to be an odd number of negatives multiplied together. So the first two, negative 5 and negative 5, are going to give me a positive 25. But there's another negative left over to make the result negative again. So yes, I can do the third root of a negative number. What's that symbol mean? Sixth root. Can I do a sixth root of negative 64? Is there any number, if I take it to the sixth power, it'll give me a negative 64? Why not? It's even. That means there's going to be 6 of them. It doesn't matter. If they're all positive, obviously the result's going to be positive. If they're all negative, again, as we saw before, an even power, the result is always going to be positive. So because that's an even index on my root, I cannot do the even root of a negative number. Now they don't have like an I or anything defined for roots other than square roots. At least not unless you get into abstract algebra. Then they get into all that stuff, which we're not going to. Okay, that is all of the new material for Unit 1. Is there anything anybody has any questions on? Okay, I know we're a little bit early today, but I wanted to make sure everybody had time to get caught up. There is a new quiz that is due tomorrow, Tuesday, at 11:59 p.m. So I recommend you work on that first. There is another homework assignment. It's going to be due for Wednesday at class time. And then, of course, on Wednesday, it's going to be test 1 review. So we will spend the whole hour, unless there's questions on homework. We'll be more than happy to go over questions on the homework. We will spend the whole hour reviewing for the test on Wednesday. Thursday is our Unit 1 test. The computer lab next door is open for us, so I recommend that you start working on the quiz if you need to, and I'll be here to answer any questions. Otherwise, we'll see you on Wednesday.